I'm sitting in the waiting room at the doctor's office in Newark, wearing my soft pink bathrobe, the one worn thin at the elbows, and I'm thinking about that wedding toast, that moment. God, I hate even saying it out loud. But here we are. My brother-in-law got up in front of everybody, and I mean everybody, all 200 of them packed into that banquet hall. And he said, well, Mom wanted to give us $500 for the honeymoon, but she couldn't spare it. And then he laughed. He laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever said. The whole family laughed with him. I was wearing a navy dress that day, something I'd bought for the occasion because I wanted to feel special. Instead, I felt invisible. Or worse than invisible. Seen, but in the wrong way. You know what I mean? Like, everybody was looking at me all at once, and all they saw was someone who couldn't even manage $500. Someone pathetic enough to become a punchline at a wedding. The thing is, I had the $500. I could have given it to them. But my daughter, my youngest, Rebecca, she had just been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and I was helping her with her medical bills because her insurance barely covered anything. So I said no, I said I couldn't do it. And in that moment, when he said it out loud, when he made me the joke of the evening, something inside me just cracked a little. That's when it really started, I think. Not the betrayal itself, but the moment I decided I deserved it. See, my ex-husband, because that's what I'm talking about here, even though it took me months to admit it, he had been using my health against me for years. Years. I was living in this senior living studio out on the rural outskirts of Newark, where all the mobile homes are scattered across that wide open sky, and he was making all my decisions for me, my medical decisions, my money decisions. He'd tell me I was too sick to work, too forgetful to manage my own accounts, too anxious to understand financial things. And I believed him. I actually believed him. I'm 43 years old. I should have known better. But resignation just settles into your bones after a while, doesn't it? You start thinking, well, I'm getting older. Maybe I'm not as sharp as I used to be. Maybe I really do need someone to handle things for me. Maybe this is just how life is supposed to be. I gave up everything. My independence, my right to say no, my ability to make a single decision without consulting him first. He controlled where I could go, what I could buy, who I could see. He made me keep my money in accounts he managed. He told the doctors what medications I should take. He decided when I could visit my grandchildren. And I let him. I let him because I was tired and because I thought I was too old and too broken to fight back. The summer heat in New Jersey that year was relentless. Just absolutely relentless. I remember the fans spinning all day long in my studio, and I'd sit there in that soft pink bathrobe, the one that was falling apart at the elbows, and I'd stir my ham hocks and green beans and pretend that this was fine, that this was normal. I had my hymnal on the shelf, the one with my name written inside the cover in my mother's handwriting, and I'd read the passages about patience and endurance and suffering. God wants us to suffer, I told myself. This is my cross to bear. I made peach preserves every summer, and I was good at it. That was the one thing that was mine, not because he let me do it, but because he didn't think it mattered enough to control. Every jar that went into my ceramic cookie jar shaped like a little house on the kitchen counter was a small piece of myself I got to keep. But if you're listening to this right now, if any of this sounds familiar to you, please, I'm asking you to like and subscribe to this channel. Not for me, but because there's someone out there who needs to hear this story. Someone who's sitting in a waiting room right now, or lying in bed at night wondering if they're crazy or if they're imagining things. They need to know they're not alone. And the only way this message gets to them is if you help spread it. I remember the exact moment I realized something was deeply wrong. It was July, and the heat was making everything slow down. The fan was spinning, and I was sitting at my tiny kitchenette table looking at the ceramic cookie jar. I'd just made a fresh batch of peach preserves and the jars were cooling on the counter. He came in without knocking. He never knocked anymore. He said he needed to talk to me about my medication. I said, "Which medication?" And he looked at me like I was stupid. "Your blood pressure medication. You know you can't remember these things on your own. But here's the thing. I didn't have high blood pressure. I never had. But he'd been telling doctors I did for months, years maybe, and they believed him because he was there at every appointment, speaking for me, answering questions before I could open my mouth. That's when I started to understand what sacrifice really meant. I'd sacrificed my autonomy, not in one big dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small ones. Every time I let him speak for me at the doctor's office, every time I handed over my disability check without counting it first, every time I said yes when I meant no or stayed silent when I should have screamed. I used to make peach preserves with my mother. Every summer, we'd spend whole afternoons in her kitchen, our hands sticky with sugar and fruit. We'd talk about everything, my dreams, my plans, the life I wanted to build. She'd tell me stories about her own mother, about resilience and strength and never letting anyone make you small. I wonder what she'd think if she could see me now, living in a studio apartment with a shared hallway, wearing a bathrobe that's falling apart, letting a man who isn't even my husband anymore control every aspect of my life. But back then, I told myself it was different. I told myself he was helping me. That's what I believed. That's the lie I repeated every single day until it became the truth I lived by. He's helping me, he cares about me, he knows what's best for me. I'm too sick to manage on my own, I'm too confused, I'm too old. 43 isn't old, but when someone treats you like you're helpless long enough, you start to feel ancient. I'd open my hymnal at night and read about suffering, about endurance, about Job and his trials, and I'd think, this is my test. This is what God wants from me, to endure, to be patient, to accept my lot in life without complaint. My daughter Rebecca would call sometimes, and I could hear the pain in her voice. The fibromyalgia was destroying her. She couldn't work. She could barely move some days. And her medical bills were piling up, thousands and thousands of dollars, because her insurance company found every possible excuse to deny coverage. So, when my son asked me for $500 for his honeymoon, I said no, not because I didn't have it, but because Rebecca needed it more, because I was already giving her everything I could, which wasn't much. And that's why the toast hurt so badly. Because I was already stretched thin, already sacrificing everything for my kids, and instead of understanding, instead of respecting my decision, they turned me into a joke. They made my poverty, my struggle, my inability to give them more money into entertainment for 200 wedding guests. The ham hocks and green beans simmered on the stove that night when I got home from the wedding. I stood in my kitchenette, still wearing the navy dress, and I cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears running down my face while I stirred the pot. That ceramic cookie jar sat on the counter, full of peach preserves I'd never eat, because who was I making them for? Not for myself. I didn't even like peaches that much. I made them because it was something I used to do with my mother, and holding on to that ritual made me feel less alone. But I was alone. Profoundly. Completely alone. The summer stretched on, and the heat never broke. I'd sit by the window in my studio apartment, looking out at the mobile homes scattered across the landscape, at that wide-open sky, and I'd think about driving away. Just getting in a car and leaving. Going somewhere nobody knew my name or my story or how pathetic I'd become. I imagined myself in a brand new Cadillac Escalade, midnight black, driving down empty highways with the windows down and the radio loud, free, untethered, myself again. But I didn't have a car. I didn't have the money for a car. I barely had enough to keep my utilities on. And he knew it. My ex-husband knew exactly how trapped I was. That's why he could control me so easily. Because without him, I had nothing. No income beyond my disability checks, no savings, no way to leave. That's what I thought anyway. That's what he'd taught me to believe. It took me a long time to realize that the sacrifice he was asking from me wasn't love, it was erasure. He wanted me to disappear into his version of who I should be. Quiet, compliant, grateful, too confused to ask questions, too sick to fight back. And for years, that's exactly who I was. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. I remember because it was my doctor's appointment day, the one I'd been sitting in the waiting room for when this whole story started. I was there for a routine checkup, nothing serious, just the kind of appointment you have when you're middle-aged and your body is starting to fall apart in small, manageable ways. The nurse called me back, and I sat on the exam table in my soft pink bathrobe because I'd forgotten to change before leaving the house. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a clipboard full of questions. "Can you tell me what medications you're currently taking?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing came out. I couldn't remember, not a single one, because I didn't take my medications. He gave them to me. He sorted them into little containers and handed them to me with water and told me when to swallow. The nurse waited. I felt sweat prickling at the back of my neck. "I'm not sure," I finally said. "My ex-husband usually handles that." "Your ex-husband?" "Yes. He helps me with medical things." She frowned just slightly. "You should know what medications you're taking. It's important information to have, especially in an emergency." That's when something shifted. Just a tiny crack in the wall I'd built around my own helplessness. She was right. Of course she was right. How had I let things get so bad that I didn't even know what pills I was putting in my body every day? When I got home, I asked him. I said, "What medications am I taking?" He was standing in my kitchenette, eating directly from one of my jars of peach preserves with a spoon. He didn't even look up. "Why are you asking?" "Because the nurse said I should know." "The nurse doesn't understand your condition. You're too anxious to manage these things on your own. That's why I do it for you." But his voice had an edge to it, a sharpness I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I'd noticed it 1,000 times and chosen to ignore it. "I'd still like to know," I pressed, and that's when he got angry. Really angry. He slammed the jar down on the counter and some of the preserve splattered onto the ceramic cookie jar. "Jesus Christ, do you ever just say thank you? Do you ever appreciate anything I do for you? I'm the only reason you're not dead or homeless or God knows what else." I stood there frozen while he stormed out of my apartment, and for the first time in years, I thought, that's not true. That's not true at all. That night, I went through my mail. All of it. The bills I'd been letting him handle, the bank statements I'd signed without reading, the medical paperwork I'd trusted him to manage. And that's when I found it. Withdrawals. Small ones, $50 here, $75 there, spread out over months and months. But when I added them up, it came to thousands. Thousands of dollars taken from my disability checks. Money I'd thought was going toward my rent, my utilities, my medication. Money that was just gone. I sat on my bed with the statement spread around me like evidence at a crime scene, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage. My hands shook as I held one particular statement. March through May. $97, $123, $85, $52. I traced each withdrawal with my finger, and with each one, I felt more of myself coming back. The anger wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, methodical. It made my mind sharp in a way it hadn't been in years. I got up and went to my closet. In the back, behind the shoes I never wore, and the winter coats I couldn't afford to replace, there was a shoebox. Inside were birthday cards, old photos, receipts I'd kept for no particular reason. But underneath all that was something I'd forgotten about, a small notebook. My mother had given it to me years ago, before she died. "Keep track of your money," she'd said. "Never let anyone else do it for you." I'd stopped using it when he told me I was too confused to balance my own checkbook, when he said he'd handle it because I was making mistakes. What mistakes? I couldn't remember making any mistakes, but I'd believed him anyway. Now I opened that notebook and started writing. Every withdrawal, every date, every amount. I created a ledger of my own exploitation, line by line, in my mother's handwriting style. It took me 3 hours. By the time I was done, the summer sun had set completely, and the room was dark except for the single lamp by my bed. The total was $8,347. Over 2 years, from someone who only got $900 a month in disability. I stared at that number until my eyes burned. $8,000. That was a car. That was a year's rent. That was Rebecca's medical bills paid off twice over. That was my independence, quantified and stolen $50 at a time. And then I remembered the photo album. I don't know why I thought of it right then, but I pulled it out from under my bed where I kept it hidden. I started flipping through the pages, looking at versions of myself I barely recognized. Me at 23, laughing at a party. Me at 30, holding my newborn son. Me at 38, standing in front of a brand new Cadillac Escalade that belonged to my cousin, wearing a red dress and smiling like I owned the world. I stared at that photo for a long time, at the brightness in my eyes, at the way I held my shoulders back, at the woman who looked like she had her whole life ahead of her. And I thought, what happened to her? Where did she go? That's when I collapsed. Not physically, but emotionally. I lay down on my bed, still fully dressed, and I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. I cried for the woman in the photo. I cried for the years I'd lost. I cried for the peach preserves I'd made for a man who ate them without asking. I cried for the ceramic cookie jar that held nothing but empty sweetness. I cried for the autonomy I'd given away piece by piece until there was nothing left of me but compliance. I cried until the summer sun went down and the room got dark and the fan kept spinning overhead, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living like this. Something has to change. So I called my doctor. The next morning, when the office opened, I called and I said, I need help. Someone is controlling my life and I don't know how to stop it. And she said, come in, right now. Don't wait for your next appointment. Just come in. I went. I told her everything. The medications I didn't know I was taking. The money that was disappearing. The way he answered questions for me at appointments. The way he'd convinced me I was too sick, too confused, too incompetent to manage my own life. She listened. She took notes. And then she said, I'm going to refer you to someone who can help, a lawyer who specializes in financial exploitation. I didn't know what that meant. Financial exploitation. It sounded too formal, too legal to describe what was happening to me, but I took the referral and I called the number, and a week later I was sitting in an office downtown talking to a woman named Patricia who had short gray hair and the most direct eye contact I'd ever experienced. Patricia looked at my bank statements. She looked at my medical records. She asked me questions about decision-making, about who controlled what aspects of my life, about how long this had been going on. And then she said, this is exploitation. What he's doing to you is illegal. And it stops now. I didn't believe her at first. How could it be illegal? He was just helping me, wasn't he? But Patricia explained it. How using someone's medical condition to control them is abuse. How taking money without permission is theft. How isolating someone and making all their decisions for them is a form of imprisonment, even if there are no locked doors. She said, you're not crazy. You're not incompetent. You've been systematically controlled by someone who knows exactly what he's doing. Patricia's office was small but organized. File cabinets lined one wall, and her desk was covered with folders, each one probably representing someone like me. Someone who'd been convinced they were helpless. She had a photo on her desk of two women, both about her age, standing on a beach somewhere sunny. Her wife, maybe. Or her sister. People who loved her and saw her as strong. I wondered if anyone saw me as strong anymore. I need you to understand something, Patricia continued, leaning forward in her chair. What's happening to you happens to thousands of people every year. And the reason it keeps happening is because people like him are very, very good at making people like you feel like it's your fault. Like you're the problem. Like you need them. But I do need help, I said quietly. I can't work. My health, needing support is not the same as needing control, she interrupted. You can need help with some things and still maintain autonomy over your life. Those aren't contradictory. He's made you believe they are. We spent 2 hours in that office. She asked me to tell her every detail I could remember. When had he started managing my money? How had he gotten access to my accounts? What did he say when I questioned him? How did he react when I tried to make my own decisions? With each question, I saw the pattern more clearly. How he'd started small, offering to help with a bill here, picking up my medication there. How he'd gradually inserted himself into every aspect of my life until I couldn't remember what it felt like to make a decision without consulting him first. "Here's what we're going to do," Patricia said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "First, we're going to document everything. Every withdrawal, every medical appointment where he spoke for you, every time he prevented you from seeing someone or going somewhere. Second, we're going to freeze your accounts and open new ones in your name only. Third, we're going to notify every doctor you see that you are the only person authorized to make medical decisions. And fourth, we're going to file a police report." "A police report?" My voice came out small. "But he's family. He's my ex-husband. He's my children's father. He's also someone who's stealing from you and controlling you," Patricia said firmly. "That doesn't stop being illegal just because you have a relationship with him." And that's when I started to fight back. Not with violence, not with drama, but with truth. Simple, devastating truth. I told my daughter Rebecca what had been happening. I expected her to be shocked, to be angry on my behalf, but she just looked tired. "Mom," she said, "I've been worried about you for years, but every time I tried to say something, you defended him." "I didn't know," I said. "I really didn't know." "Maybe part of you did," she said gently. "Maybe part of you knew the whole time, and you just couldn't admit it yet." I told my sister. She was more skeptical. "Are you sure you're not just upset about the wedding thing? Sometimes people take offense when they shouldn't." I showed her the bank statements. Her face changed as she looked at them. Mom, this is serious. I know. Have you talked to the police?" "Patricia says I should." "Who's Patricia?" "A lawyer. She specializes in financial exploitation of seniors." My sister winced at the word seniors. Like it physically hurt to think of me that way. "You're only 43. Tell that to everyone who treats me like I'm 80. I told my church community, the women who'd known me for decades, who'd prayed with me through my divorce, who'd brought me casseroles when I was sick. And they said, "Have you talked to him about this? Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." But Patricia said to keep talking. She said, "The truth doesn't need everyone to believe it to be true. You just need to keep saying it out loud." So I did. I told anyone who would listen. I said his name. I said what he'd done. I showed them the bank statements. I explained how he'd been making my medical decisions without my consent. Some people believed me. Most people didn't. They'd known him for years. He was charming. He was helpful. He'd spent so long building a reputation as my caretaker that nobody could imagine him as anything else. But Patricia was relentless. She helped me file a police report. She helped me freeze my bank accounts. She helped me write a letter to my doctors saying that from now on, I would be the only one making decisions about my health. And slowly, step by step, I started taking my life back. I started saying no. I started canceling commitments I'd never wanted in the first place. I stopped answering his calls. I stopped letting him into my apartment. The liberation came in small moments. The first time I went to the doctor alone and answered all the questions myself. The first time I balanced my checkbook without asking for help. The first time I made peach preserves and ate them myself, straight from the jar, without waiting for someone else's approval. I canceled a commitment to his birthday dinner. Just didn't go. Sent a text that said, "I won't be there." No explanation, no apology, just a simple statement of fact. And you know what? The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. I just sat in my studio apartment, eating ham hocks and green beans, reading my hymnal, and feeling more peaceful than I had in years. 4 months after the wedding, after the toast that had humiliated me, after I'd started fighting back, there was another family event. His birthday. He was turning 52, and somehow everyone still expected me to show up, to bring a gift, to sing happy birthday, to pretend everything was fine. I went. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to say something. I needed them all to hear it at once. We were at a restaurant in downtown Newark. One of those places with white tablecloths and too many forks. Everyone was there. My kids, my siblings, my ex-husband's new girlfriend. The same people who'd laughed at me during that wedding toast. We ordered food. We made small talk. And then, right before the cake came out, I stood up. "I have something to say," I announced. The table went quiet. Everyone looked at me. My son's face went pale. My daughter grabbed my hand like she was trying to stop me. "I'm not giving birthday toasts," I continued. "I'm just stating facts. For the past 3 years, this man has been stealing money from my bank account. He's been making my medical decisions without my permission. He's been controlling where I go, who I see, and what I'm allowed to do with my own life. And I'm not allowing it anymore." The silence was absolute. You could have heard a fork drop. My ex-husband stood up. "That's not true. I've been helping you. You were too sick to manage on your own." "I was never too sick," I said. "You just convinced me I was. You convinced everyone I was. But I'm not. And this stops now." I took the ceramic cookie jar out of my bag, the one from my kitchen counter, the one shaped like a little house. I'd brought it with me because I needed a symbol. I needed something to make this moment real. I set it on the table. And then I said, "This jar used to hold peach preserves I made for you. For all of you. Because I thought that's what family meant. Giving everything you have and asking for nothing back. But I'm done. You want my preserves. You want my money. You want my time. Earn it. Respect me. Or lose me." And then I walked out. I left the restaurant, left my family sitting there in stunned silence, and I drove home in the rideshare I'd called from the bathroom. I didn't have a Cadillac Escalade, but I had my dignity back. The aftermath was messy. My family called, they texted, they showed up at my door. Some of them were angry. Some of them wanted to mediate. Some of them accused me of tearing the family apart over money, but I stood firm. I said the same thing to all of them. Respect me or lose me. Those are your options. My son came to see me a week later. He sat in my kitchenette and said, "I didn't know. I swear, Mom, I didn't know how bad it was." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But another part of me remembered the wedding toast, remembered how he'd laughed along with everyone else. "It doesn't matter if you knew," I said. "What matters is what you do now." He nodded. He apologized. He promised to do better. And I said, "Okay, show me." Because apologies are easy. Change is hard. And I'd spent too many years accepting easy apologies that never led to real change. The second twist came about 2 months after the birthday confrontation. Everything seemed to be settling down. I'd established new boundaries. I'd taken control of my finances. I'd hired my own lawyer, separate from Patricia, to handle some legal paperwork. I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I'd won. And then he got sick. Not pretend sick, really sick. Emergency room sick, heart attack sick. My daughter called me in the middle of the night. "Mom, he's in the hospital. We need you." I sat on my bed, phone pressed to my ear, fan spinning overhead, and I thought about all the times I'd dropped everything to help him, all the times I'd rearranged my life to meet his needs. And I said, "No, what do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not coming. I'm not helping. I'm not paying his medical bills. I'm not sitting in a waiting room worrying about him. No. Mom, he could die. That's not my responsibility anymore." The silence on the other end was heavy. I could hear Rebecca breathing, could almost hear her trying to find the right words to change my mind. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. "You've really changed." "Yes," I agreed. "I have." But after I hung up, I sat there in the dark for a long time. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort it took to hold firm. Because part of me, a big part, wanted to go. Wanted to rush to the hospital and sit by his bedside and hold his hand and forget everything that had happened. That's what conditioning does to you, even when you know better. Even when you've seen the bank statements and talked to the lawyers and stood up in front of your family and told the truth, there's still that pull, that voice that says, "But what if you're wrong? What if he really was just trying to help? What if he dies and you could have been there?" I got up and made myself some tea. Chamomile, the kind my mother used to make when I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchenette table and watched the steam rise from the cup, and I thought about all the times he'd been sick before. Not emergency room sick, just regular sick. A cold, a headache, a stomach ache, and how I dropped everything. Canceled appointments, missed Rebecca's birthday dinner once because he needed me to pick up his prescription. Let my own medication run out because I was too busy managing his health to manage my own. He'd never done the same for me. Not once. When I was sick, he'd tell me I was exaggerating, that I needed to toughen up, that I was being dramatic, but I was supposed to drop everything for him. That was the unspoken rule. His needs were always more important than mine. Not anymore. I finished my tea and went back to bed. And I slept. Deeply, peacefully, for the first time in weeks. He didn't die. He recovered, and 6 weeks later, he was back in the emergency room with another health crisis. And again, the family called. Again, they expected me to show up, to help, to contribute financially. And again, I said no. But this time, my son called. Not Rebecca, my son whose wedding toast had started all of this. "Mom, please. I know things have been difficult. I know you're angry. But he's asking for you." "I don't care," I said. And I meant it. He wants to apologize. He can apologize over the phone. He wants to do it in person. Then he can come to my apartment when he's out of the hospital, if I decide to let him in. There was a long pause. Then my son said, "You really aren't going to help at all? Not even with the bills?" And there it was, the real reason for the call. Not because his father wanted to apologize, because they needed money. "No," I said. "I'm not helping with the bills. He stole over $8,000 from me. He can use that money to pay his medical bills. Oh, wait, he can't, because he already spent it." "Mom, I'm hanging up now. Don't call me about this again." And I did. I hung up, and I turned off my phone for the rest of the day. This was the final test. The moment when I had to prove to myself that I really had changed, that I really meant what I'd said at that birthday dinner. The justice I got wasn't the kind you see in movies. He didn't go to jail. He didn't lose everything. My family didn't unanimously turn against him and recognize me as the victim. Instead, something quieter happened. The family stopped including me in certain events. They stopped asking me for money. They stopped calling me first when they needed something. And at first, that felt like rejection. Like I'd lost them. But then I realized I hadn't lost them. I'd lost the version of me that they'd been using. And that was okay. That was necessary. Some family members did believe me. My cousin, the one who owned the Cadillac Escalade I'd posed in front of all those years ago, she reached out. She said, "I always thought something was off. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." We started having coffee together, just the two of us, talking about life and resilience and what it means to rebuild yourself from nothing. And that's when I started to understand what justice really looks like. It's not always dramatic. It's not always satisfying. Sometimes justice is just being able to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. 8 months after the birthday dinner, I moved out of the senior living studio. It was too full of bad memories, too connected to the person I used to be. I found a room in a community living space on the other side of Newark, a place where mostly women lived, women my age and older, women who'd been through things. The room wasn't fancy. It had a kitchenette, just like my old place. But it had something my old place never had. Good neighbors. Real neighbors. Women who knocked on my door to borrow sugar and stayed for tea. Women who invited me to join them for walks. Women who told me their stories and listened to mine. I started making peach preserves again, but this time I shared them. I'd make big batches and distribute jars to my neighbors, to the women who'd become my friends, my chosen family. One of them, Dorothy, she was 78 years old and sharp as a tack. She'd been a teacher her whole life, never married, fiercely independent. She said to me one day, "You know what I learned? Blood doesn't make family. Loyalty makes family. Respect makes family. Showing up makes family. I thought about that a lot, about all the years I'd given my blood family everything, and how little they'd given back. About how the people who loved me now, my neighbors in this community living space, they weren't related to me by blood, but they were more family than anyone I'd grown up with. Dorothy had this way of making you feel seen, not in the way my ex-husband had made me feel seen, like he was cataloging my failures and weaknesses, but seen in a good way. Like she recognized your worth even when you couldn't see it yourself. She'd been through her own version of this story, though she never gave me all the details. "Different man. Same tactics," she said once, waving her hand dismissively. "They all read from the same playbook, don't they? Make you feel small, make you feel incompetent. Take your money, take your choices, take your life, piece by piece, until you don't even recognize yourself anymore." "How did you get out?" I asked her. "Same way you did. One decision at a time, one no at a time, one day at a time." We were sitting in her room when she said this, drinking coffee she'd made too strong, the way she liked it. Her room was full of books, floor to ceiling, organized by color. It was beautiful in a chaotic sort of way. "The hardest part," she continued, "was accepting that some people would never believe me, that I'd lose relationships I thought were important. But then I realized those relationships were only important because I'd been conditioned to think they were. They weren't adding anything to my life. They were just taking." "That's exactly how I feel," I said. "Good. That means you're seeing clearly now. Hold on to that clarity. It'll save your life." There was another woman in our building, Maria. She was only 35 but looked older, worn down by circumstances I didn't fully understand at first. She had 3 kids who came to visit every other weekend, and you could see her come alive when they were there. But when they left, she'd sink back into this quiet sadness. One evening, she knocked on my door. She was holding an empty mason jar. "Do you have any sugar I could borrow?" I invited her in, made her tea. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her ex-husband, about the restraining order, about the financial abuse that had left her bankrupt, about how she'd had to flee with her kids in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. "Everyone said I was overreacting," she told me, even my own mother. She said, "All marriages are hard. You just have to work through it." But how do you work through someone emptying your bank account? How do you work through someone threatening to hurt you if you leave? I didn't have an answer, but I held her hand while she cried, and I gave her a jar of peach preserves, and I said, "You did the right thing. You saved yourself. You saved your kids. That takes more strength than anyone who hasn't been through it can understand." She came back the next day with the mason jar full of cookies she'd made. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for not judging. We've got to stick together," I told her. And I meant it. I got a new ceramic cookie jar. This one wasn't shaped like a house. It was just a simple blue jar with a lid, nothing fancy. And I kept it on my counter, full of peach preserves I made for myself and people who deserved them. The summer passed, and fall came, and then winter. The seasons changed, and I changed with them. I stopped wearing that soft pink bathrobe. I bought new clothes that fit right, that made me feel like myself. I started wearing my hair differently. Small things, but they mattered. I went back to church, to the hymnal with my mother's handwriting inside. But I read different passages now. Not the ones about suffering and endurance, the ones about justice and renewal, the ones about God lifting up the downtrodden and humbling the proud. I thought about my mother a lot, about how she'd made peach preserves with me every summer, how she'd taught me to be strong. And I realized she would be proud of me. Not for enduring, for finally refusing to endure anymore. My daughter Rebecca got better, not completely. Fibromyalgia doesn't work like that, but better. She found new treatments, new doctors, new ways to manage the pain. And she came to visit me in my new place, in my room with the good neighbors. She sat at my kitchenette table, the one I'd bought used from a thrift store, and she said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." For what? For fighting back, for showing me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. And that's when I realized the sacrifice I'd made wasn't my autonomy. The sacrifice I'd made was my example. For years, I'd shown my children that it was okay to be treated badly. That love meant accepting mistreatment. That family meant giving up everything and asking for nothing. But now I was showing them something different. I was showing them that you can rebuild, that you can change, that you can be 43 years old, living in a room in a community space, wearing a bathrobe that's falling apart, and still find the strength to reclaim your life. I never did get to drive a brand new Cadillac Escalade in midnight black, but I learned to take the bus. I learned the routes, the schedules, the rhythm of public transportation. And there was something freeing about that, about not needing a fancy car to feel like I was going somewhere. I built a new tribe. That's what Dorothy called it. We're building a tribe, she'd say. Women who've survived things. Women who know their worth. We'd have dinners together, potlucks where everyone brought something. I'd bring my ham hocks and green beans, the recipe my mother taught me. Someone else would bring cornbread, someone else would bring pie. And we'd sit around a big table, sometimes 10 or 12 of us. And we'd talk about our lives, our mistakes, our victories, our ongoing battles. None of us were perfect. We'd all made terrible choices. We'd all stayed too long in bad situations. We'd all sacrificed things we shouldn't have sacrificed. But we were here now. We were alive. We were free. And that was enough. 9 months after the birthday dinner, after I'd stood up and told the truth in front of everyone, after I'd walked out with my ceramic cookie jar and my dignity intact, I got a call from my son. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you something." I braced myself. What now? What new crisis? What new demand? But instead he said, "I talked to a lawyer about what he did to you, and I want you to know that I believe you. I'm sorry it took me so long." I didn't cry. I'd cried enough. But I felt something shift inside me, a weight I'd been carrying, the weight of not being believed. It got just a little bit lighter. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. He asked if we could have lunch. Just the two of us, no ex-husband, no drama, just a meal together. We met at a diner near my community living space. Nothing fancy. Burgers and fries and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting too long. And he said, "I was embarrassed. At the wedding, when I made that toast, I thought it was funny. I didn't understand what you were dealing with." "You hurt me," I said. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." "I know, and I'm sorry." We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his marriage, about money troubles he was having, about stress at work. And for the first time in years, I listened without immediately offering to fix things, without offering money, without offering to sacrifice myself. I just listened. And when he was done, I said, "I can't help you financially, but I can listen and I can love you. If that's enough, then we can rebuild this." He nodded. "That's enough." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We didn't make grand promises about the future, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need. A start. As the year came to a close, I started thinking about what I'd learned, about what this whole experience had taught me. And I realized I needed to share it, not just with my family or my neighbors, but with everyone, with anyone who might be going through something similar. Because here's what I learned. Here's what I need you to know. A 2014 study showed that almost 4 in 10 seniors have experienced verbal abuse. 4 in 10. That's not a small number. That's millions of people. Millions of people being told they're stupid, they're incompetent, they're too old to understand things. Millions of people being controlled and manipulated and isolated. And the money. God, the money. Annual losses from financial exploitation of seniors, it's between $28 and $36 billion. Billion. With a B, that's not an accident. That's not people making mistakes. That's systematic theft. That's people taking advantage of vulnerability, of trust, of family bonds. But here's what else I learned. You have legal rights. You have protection under the law. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to control your own medical decisions. You are allowed to know what medications you're taking. You are allowed to manage your own money. You don't need to be a lawyer to understand this. You just need to know that the law is on your side. that financial exploitation is illegal, that medical abuse is illegal, that controlling someone through their health condition is illegal. If someone is making all your decisions, if someone is taking your money without permission, if someone is isolating you from friends and family, if someone is speaking for you at doctor's appointments, that's not help. That's control, and it's not okay. I learned that you can cancel commitments you never wanted, that saying no is a complete sentence, that you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting yourself. I learned that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people you find along the way, the neighbors who become friends, the professionals who believe you, the strangers who reach out and say, "Me too. This happened to me too." I learned that 43 isn't old, that you're never too broken to rebuild, that transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments. A canceled dinner, a phone call to a lawyer, a moved jar of peach preserves. I learned that justice doesn't always look like you think it will. Sometimes the people who hurt you never face consequences. Sometimes your family never fully believes you. Sometimes the satisfaction you get is just the ability to look in the mirror and recognize yourself again. And I learned that rebirth is possible, that you can lose everything, your money, your autonomy, your sense of self, and still find a way back. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, but it's possible. Now I sit in my room in the community living space with my good neighbors and my blue ceramic cookie jar and my jars of peach preserves made for people who deserve them. I wear clothes that fit right. I manage my own money. I make my own medical decisions. I say no when I want to say no. The summer heat comes and goes. The fan spins. I raid my hymnal. I cook my ham hocks and green beans. And I feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. Peace is different from happiness. Peace is deeper. It's the knowledge that whatever happens next, you can handle it. That you've already survived the worst thing, and you're still here. I look at the photo sometimes, the one of me standing in front of that Cadillac Escalade, wearing a red dress, smiling like I own the world. And I realize I was never looking for the car. I was looking for the feeling of belonging to myself, of knowing my own worth, of refusing to settle for less than I deserve. And I found it. Not in a car or a house or a relationship. I found it in a room in a community living space, surrounded by women who've survived things, who know their worth, who refuse to be diminished. So, here's what I want to ask you. Have you lived this? Do you know someone who has? Are you sitting right now, listening to this, and thinking, that's me? That's my life? If you are, I need you to know something. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not making it up. And it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to change it. Nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself. And you can. I promise you, you can. Call a lawyer who specializes in elder financial exploitation. Call your doctor and tell them the truth. Call a friend you trust. Call someone who will believe you. Take control of your bank accounts. Learn what medications you're taking. Start saying no. Cancel commitments you never wanted. Build a new tribe. It won't be easy. Your family might not believe you. People might think you're overreacting. You might lose relationships you thought were important. But you'll gain something more valuable. Yourself. And if this story helped you, if it made you think, or feel, or realize something about your own life, please like and subscribe. Not for me. For the next person who needs to hear this. For the woman sitting in a doctor's office wearing a bathrobe worn thin at the elbows, wondering if she's crazy. For the man who's been told he's too old to manage his own affairs. For anyone who's been made small by someone who claimed to be helping them. Share this story. Let it reach the people who need it. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone is sitting at a wedding, listening to a toast that humiliates them and thinking they deserve it. They don't. And neither did I.